It's a pleasure for me to present you Jörgen Gren, Resource Director for the Director General of Translation at the European Commission. Please, Jörgen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can all see the presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for this invitation to speak in this important event and to speak about the Accessibility Directive and different services and automated translation. Sorry, let me see. So I do have quite a digital background. I used to be a head of unit in DG Connect, where I was responsible for the digital agenda at the time. And then I moved to the cabinet of the Commission Vice President, Andrus Ansip, who was responsible for the digital single market and was piloting there a certain number of projects and initiatives and helped to make the digital single market a reality. And now I am a resources director in DGT with responsibility for things like HR, for IT, but importantly also for our e-translation system, which is, in our view at least, a great success by any measure. We have around 100 million pages translated per year. It's used by all institutions, some member states administrations and an SME across the European Union because of its secure way of handling different documents. But now moving on to the accessibility issue, there is a legal framework which is both at the level of the UN but also at the level of the EU. You see many of the different initiatives and rules on the screen in front of you. But accessibility, what does it mean? It implies that a product and service relating to any aspect of human life can be used by everyone, regardless of their needs. The legal framework we operate in is based on the UN Convention from 2006, and this is one of the only UN conventions which is signed by the EU as an entity. I mean, this is a big issue. We have around 87 million people in the European Union who have a disability. I will give you some statistics which are not on the slide, but I will give them to you orally, which illustrates how important this issue is. If you go into IT and to digital services, we have measured, and these different figures, they come from the initiative that we have on disability and the new strategy that we have on disability 2021-2030. But 64% of people with disabilities have access to the internet, 88% of the rest of the population in EU. 28% of all school leavers are people with disabilities. We have 800,000 citizens who are deprived of their rights in EP elections, just as a couple of examples. 37.6% of people with disabilities are inactive towards 17% of the rest of the population. The employment rate is lower, 50% roughly for people with disabilities and 75% for the less for people without disabilities. 1 million people under 65 are in institutions, 2 million people above 65 with disabilities are in institutions. So these different figures, I think, show quite clearly the importance of the issue. As I said, 87 million people in the EU, 1 billion people estimated across the world. So this situation, if you will, gave birth to two pieces of legislation to comply. And they are tellingly a part of the digital single market, and they were adopted as a part of the digital single market. The first one is the Web Accessibility Act, which aims to approximate laws, regulations and administrative provisions of the member states for the accessibility requirements of the websites and mobile applications of the public sector bodies. You also have the Accessibility Directive, which has a similar purpose, but broader in scope when it comes to products and services, particularly for the commercial sector. But although the Web Accessibility Act does not directly apply to EU institutions, all European Commission websites and apps are encouraged to follow these rules, and all EU institutions should definitely comply. This is a little bit of a parenthesis here. This is perhaps a speciality for EU institutions, because all of our, or at least most of our rules and regulations apply directly to member states, but not to us. So we have to either directly say that we respect these different rules or have specific rules which apply to us. A little specificity perhaps in the European Union system. But the Web Accessibility Act stipulates the following. Accessibility must be assured. This is a duty on the European Commission. This is a duty on the different institutions. There are some exceptions. For instance, older office file formats, time-based media published before 2020, live time-based media, online maps, third-party content. There are some exceptions here. But generally speaking, this is about defining accessibility requirements for the websites and the mobile applications of the public sector bodies. And importantly, accessibility needs to be thought about already at the design phase, and to be easy to understand, deal with, and to comprehend. There are 4 different principles of accessibility. Now we'll go into them in a little bit more detail when I come a little bit later to how we actually do this. But there's perceivability, so the information and user interface needs to be presentable so that users can actually perceive what is going on. Operability, to ensure that they can be operable or usable in a good way. Understandable or understandability. The information and the operation of the user interface needs to be understandable, and also robustness, which means that the content must be robust enough to be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of users, but also assistive technologies. There are also a certain number of standards that are referenced to in the text. The European standard, which is mentioned up there, 301/549, is the key standard, and it is quite practical, very practical, even it's extremely detailed. I don't know if you have read it, but it is extremely detailed and very practical, and it involves things like viewing angles, distances, and height of characters. So just to give you an example, and this is measured in millimeters. So if you have a viewing angle of 0.7 degrees, and you're viewing this at 600 millimeters distance, 60 centimeters distance, then the character would need to be at least 7.3 millimeters. So this is the level of detail and practicality that this standard implies. Many other standards are not as detailed, but this one is very detailed. There are other examples as well, such as double strike key acceptance, which means that the delay after a keystroke should be adjustable to at least 0.5 seconds, so to avoid double strikes for people with certain motor type of disabilities. And this also makes, in turn, this standard. So our text makes reference to this standard, and this standard makes reference, if you will, to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are also quite detailed and which are developed by the W3C Worldwide Web Consortium, which is a consortium of virtually all big and small web players and many web media companies, such as Facebook, Adobe, BBC, CERN, Cisco. It's quite a lot of companies which are members of this consortium. But when it comes to the different acts and directives, we are now in implementation mode. The last measures for mobile applications of public sectors apply since June 2021. So the texts apply since June 2021 in their entirety. Now, we, as a public sector organization, we have the obligation to act, as I said before. We have a duty to ensure that we do not exclude people from accessing our content. Again, repeating, 87 million people in the EU have a disability, and we have, again, the duty to remove as many barriers to access content online as possible. Now, this is also benefits which are good for not only people with disabilities, but for all kinds of users, and this is quite important to remember. Now, as I said, we have 4 different principles of web accessibility that we are working with across the board in the European Union and also in the European organization, taking the Europa portal as an example. What does this practically mean? So, perceivable. For us, it means that the content should be available to at least one of the user's senses. For example, is a transcript of audio-only content available for deaf users? Second principle, operable, making sure that the content can be controlled by a variety of tools. For example, using the keyboard only for people who are not able, as an example, to use a mouse. Understandable, using clear and simple language. This also goes into, of course, everything that we are doing in DGT when it comes to translation, but also when it comes to editing, when it comes to fighting the fog, as it were, in terms of using clear and simple languages, with also consistent and predictable interfaces. Interfaces can also be very much geared towards people with issues, color blindness, for instance. These kind of issues are also there under this principle of understandable. So this help people at least with cognitive or reading disabilities. Robustness. The website or app should work reasonably well across different platforms, browsers, and devices, including assistive technology like hearing aids, special purpose computers, like screen readers, like voice command software. As an example, screen readers rely on the correct, just as a very, very concrete example. So screen readers rely on the correct use of tags to denote elements such as headings. It's a very simple thing, but for screen readers, it's essential that there is a HTML tag H1, which defines the most important heading, all the way down to heading 6, which defines the least important heading. So this is to be used instead of highlighting a title in bold. Otherwise, the screen readers will have difficulties understanding that this is a heading or not a heading. Small things, but important things. Then the text can, of course, be converted, as I said, into speech or to read using a braille reader and to guide the reader correctly through the text. This is also, and I'm still on robustness here, this is also about newer technologies like eye gaze or head movement trackers that could be involved, although these ones are not yet commonly available assistive technology. I use this word because this notion is very much present in the different standards. Commonly available technology. It is used in the standards to leave some room for adaptation to the future for the websites and for web technology also to catch up. It's a part of some of the caveats that exist. But as I said before, again, benefits of ensuring accessibility is not just limited to helping people with disabilities. All users benefit from well-structured, clearly written, and standards-compliant content. This, regardless of the physical or mental abilities and the familiarity with technologies. I think you can say that these acts do indeed have a beneficial effect on all. Now, if we move on to the linguistic multilingual aspect of accessibility, what is it? I mean, we aim to provide information on our websites in all 24 official EU languages. All content that we have is published in English, at least, because research has shown that with English we can reach around 90% of our visitors to our sites in either their preferred foreign language or their native languages. But this is of course not enough by far. This is why we have launched the Etranslation system on all of our platforms, and this is in the process of being implemented across all of the different EU platforms. So you can today, in the most important one, virtually all of them, be ensured that you have different languages, all the official languages that you can use where the platform offers e-translation. As I said, this is being rolled out across the board on all of the different Europa websites. This is available to platforms. This is available to EU staff. It's a public service, e-translation I'm talking about now. It's available to member states administration. It's available to European SMEs, and it's available to universities. So the overall aim with e-translation is to help to reduce barriers in the multilingual digital single market. And the multilingual digital single market is a very important notion in this context. Now, for the Europa website, where e-translation, as I said, it's usually available, we have a certain number of principles, or two key principles, if you will. The first one is user first, so that we have easy navigation, and inclusiveness as a design principle. As I said in the beginning, it is important that the different websites think of web accessibility as part of the design. So inclusiveness, accessible as widely as possible as a part of the design. Now, what kind of features do we have? There are very many features, of course, but it's fluid text zooming, so you can zoom in on text without compromising the layout, scrolling left, right, up, down, etc. It is fully keyboard operatable navigation. So you can use your tab button, you can skip to the main content button, etc. You have accessibility to people with color vision deficiency. So we're using color schemes. We try to use the sans serif fonts. I don't know if you know what it is, but it is the fonts which have we try to use the fonts without this little serif at the end of each of the letters or the extremities of the letters. So Times New Roman would be, for instance, an example of a font with serif. So this is also important for people with dyslexia. There are other examples. We have the Reopen EU websites, which have helped a lot of millions of EU citizens during the COVID. Here we have, for instance, a color coding, which is specifically designed for colorblind people. So using some of these different tables which exist. So yellow can be tricky to see, for instance, so for certain visual impairment. So we have changed that into a more pastel gray, green type of color used on the website. And it, of course, depends a little bit on the color coding tables and on the type of impairment that you have. But these are just some of the examples. The tools that we have are mainly from the market. We also have a task force working with the other Commission department on accessibility to ensure that this is, as far as possible, mainstreamed across the European Union and at least across the European Commission. We have also some other tools that we use. We have Dragon Naturally Speaking, for instance, which is quite a big software, and it learns with the user itself. It works on speech recognition, speech commands, and it can be used to manipulate basically everything a user can do with the computer. We have Windows speech recognition, and moving into the M365 for us in the European Commission, it will have a lot more voice control possibilities as before. We also have assistive technologies which are provided across the board to colleagues in the European Commission, and we are working, as I said, with e-translation. And within the e-translation project, We also have a voice-to-text, speech-to-text project, which can be also very helpful moving forward. Now, e-translation is for us key, as it allows for all of the above measures to reach all citizens in the language that they understand. So e-translation and accessibility. Now, this is how e-translation provides accessibility, if you will. It provides accessibility in terms of languages, of course, but it also allows for accessibility in terms of captions, subtitling of audiovisual content. It allows for accessibility in terms of speech recognition, combined with the usual machine translation functionality. Now, some outlets, even news outlets such as Deutsche Welle, for instance, is using this particular possibility for their different programs to make them multilingual and to make them much more accessible. But there's more when it comes to e-translation and the things that we do in DGT. We also have developed a speciality of audiovisual translation and accessibility in our European Master of Translation program, which is dealing with accessibility and subtitling. In the EMT, so the European Master of Translation program, students are also trained to translate and edit specialized text for groups with special needs in relation to easy-to-read text, E2R text, easy-to-read text. And here there are, of course, different rules that need to be taken into account and learned and understood by the students, like spaced out writing, punctuation, use of difficult words or not. So these, of course, needs to be understood by students in this field of expertise. So is this all rosy? Of course not. It looks good in theory, but there are unfortunately still gaps in practice. We have to acknowledge this. There are steps going forward which are important, which are practical. At least we hope them to be practical. We have a union of equality, which is one of the priorities of the current Commission. And I just quote Mrs. von der Leyen, our president of the European Commission: persons with disabilities must fully participate in society, and they must be seen, heard, and included, dont l'acte, if I use French. So we try to act on this, of course, and we have a strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2021-2030, which was adopted in March. Now, the objectives of this union of equality, it aims to ensure that persons with disabilities can experience full social and economic inclusion on an equal basis with others and live free from discrimination. It has a certain number of priority areas. So it's about accessibility, so an enabler of rights, products, services, buildings, the web. It is about enjoying EU rights, free movement, and participation in the democratic process. It is about decent quality of life and living independently, independent living, employment, social protection. It is about equal participation and discrimination, access to justice, health, and education. It is about promoting the rights of people with disabilities, humanitarian aid, partnerships, and development. And it is also about the EU leading by example as a public administration. We have new strategies on access to buildings, on HR, etc. And the Berlin Declaration on Digital Society, the member states also signed this. But within this union of equality, there are also a certain number of very concrete steps. We are, for instance, launching a digital governance strategy on digital services. We are evaluating the Web Accessibility Act and the directive. We are reviewing the trans-European transport networks in terms of disability, and we are also pushing member states when it comes to urban mobility and sustainable mobility planning to ensure that accessibility and disabilities are included in this. We are also working, I mentioned before that everybody does not have the right or not access to voting rights. So we are working with the member states in the electoral process to ensure that voters and candidates can be correctly represented. We're also working on an e-voting compendium, so how to increase participation in voting. Other things which are going into different parts of the priorities that I just mentioned. Independent living guidance, for instance. In 2024, we will come out with a framework for social services of excellence for disabilities, access to jobs. Now we also have a follow-up to the EU Employment Equality Directive, which will be evaluated, and I think it is actually evaluated as we speak. Now we will come back potentially with further types of recommendations when it comes to this equality directive, and also we will come up with other things which are perhaps more soft type of instruments when it comes to education, for instance, an education toolkit for inclusion in early childhood education. So all of the different objectives that I just mentioned are followed up by acts, by actions. It's a quite extensive strategy that we have at the level of the European Union, which was launched, as I said, by the Commission President, Mrs. von der Leyen. Now, we also have, of course, as I said, we are trying to lead by example. So we have our own HR strategy, which will boost diversity and inclusion. And we are calling on other EU institutions to do the same. We also have a continuation of improving the accessibility of our, for instance, our buildings. So we have developed a new building policy in this sense, but also, of course, taking into consideration local laws. Now, I'm coming to my end of my presentation, but I also like to note really that we have massive advances in technology, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence applications. And they are, of course, AI is intimately linked to advances in accessibility for an even broader scope of disabilities. I give you some examples of applications. These are private applications. I'm not condoning any of them. I'm just giving some type of examples of what the different applications can do. Some are more AI than others. Now, just as a few examples, Petralex, for instance, with your iPhone, it acts as a hearing aid to gain access to sound in absence of a hearing aid that you have in your ear. Color ID, so this is you point the camera at an object and the app will speak the names of colors in real time. Be My Eyes is a different approach, but it connects people who are blind, who have low vision, with the sighted volunteers via a direct video call. So when connected, the sighted persons can assist the persons who are blind in identifying things such as checking the expiration date on food and other issues, of course. You have another one called Roger Voice. These are not the only ones in the different fields, it's just different examples. You have Roger Voice, which is captioned mobile phone calls, so the deaf caller speaks, while the voice recognition technology provides a real-time transcript of what the other individual is saying. Or Envision AI, which is an app that recognizes faces and can quickly scan and read from any text or surface like menus, signs, books, and then also handwritten text. Now, I hope I've given, a good introduction to your day here in the TEW. And I'm really looking forward to see the state of play and the different ideas from other presenters in the workshop so that we can spur the development of solutions at all levels. As I said in the very beginning, and I gave you to you in a long list of different statistics that show that this is an important and serious issue And again, I repeat, 87 million of our citizens in the European Union have some form of disability. This means that this is a broad issue and it's an important issue. But I think now it's perhaps time for questions, comments, ideas. I'm very happy again to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you for having listened to me.
Thank you, Mr. Gren. It was a very, very interesting presentation. To be honest, I didn't have a clue that accessibility, the directive and the act have such a long history, that it has been in the making, and it's obviously a very big issue and a big thing with many different sides and many different aspects to tackle. And from the viewers, you are welcome to post your questions in the chat window, or if you want to participate live, then you can move on to the Teams discussion, and we will include you from there. But to start off, I myself am a translation industry guy, so I'm very interested in e-translation and would like to hear more about that. You mentioned that it's available to SMEs. Could you tell a bit more about how they use it and what they can do with it?
Our SMEs, why, maybe if I start, why is it interesting for SMEs to use e-translation? I mean, e-translation works as any other machine translation system. It's you put it in, you put in the text, and you get the text back translated. Why it is interesting for SMEs is that we have an extremely secure system. In the more we do not try to compete with marketplace. As I said, we have 100 million pages which are translated, which is of course a huge amount of pages per se, but it is nothing compared to Google Translate, for instance. But what is perhaps important, and where SMEs I believe have a certain interest, is that it's a very secure system. We do not keep the data which is sent to us. We do not keep the data which is sent to us, which is the difference between us and many other systems. So they can be very certain that if they send contracts and things like this over the web, they are perfectly safe and secure. They sign up to the translation system and they start using it. If they are SME in the European Union, they have access. If they are outside of the European Union, they do not have access. Now, so I think this is interesting for SMEs to have such a system that they can use securely. I don't have in my head now exactly how many SMEs, but we are talking thousands. But of course, I mean, there are very many SMEs in the European Union, so all of them are not using e-translation. But the ones who feel the need, they are using e-translation. And I think that it's becoming more and more known, at least this is what I hope, as the director in charge of e-translation, that the security of this system is very high. We are also, in the background of e-translation, we of course have the language memory, which is the language memory called Euramis, which I'm sure you know. This is a language memory which is fed by the translators. So they have a very high quality type of input, and is fed by the translators every day. Now we are using the language memory to train our different engines, which means that we are also, and this can also be interesting from an SME point of view, we're also very good at European type of terminology, of linguistics, which are turned towards administrative type of language. We have two choices. We have the EU engines, EU language engines, EU linguistic type of engines, and general engines. So you can use both as an SME, and I think that is quite interesting. It's perhaps one of the first and only times where EU jargon can be seen in a positive light, if you will.
Yeah, thanks. And is it somehow limited what SMEs use the this service for, or can they use it for anything they find it suits for?
They can use it for anything, but it depends a little bit. If they use it for administrative text, they can choose the EU linguistic engines, if you will, or if they use it for more general text, they use the general engines. They have the choice.
Okay, sounds interesting. And the directive and everything that it encompasses, it's binding to public organizations, but do you see businesses and private, for example, these SMEs that already have been mentioned here a few times, do you see them using it and complying to it?
Yes, I mean, it is also with the different caveats that I mentioned, they are also the destinataires of this directive. So yes, definitely they should use it and they can use it. Now, when you go through the different standards and when you go through the different texts which are regulating the accessibility, it's clear that they are quite big and they are quite complex. But it's not something that should deter, in my opinion, SMEs from using it and from being able to give access to people with disabilities. Again, we are talking about 87 million people here in the European Union, so it's not as if it's a very small number of people. It's a huge number of people. And again, going back to what I said before, the fact that you make your websites accessible, that you make them understandable, that you make them robust, is not something which is only for useful for people with disabilities. It is useful for everybody.
Yeah, you could say that clear texts and good texts and good accessibility that helps everybody. When you think of the information flow that everybody has kind of fed upon them during the day nowadays, then it's definitely good if one can understand it.
Indeed. But then maybe I can also mention that, I mean, SMEs, all of the different examples that I mentioned of different applications which are being developed, they are of course done by SMEs. So I mean, it is not as if SMEs are not interested in the accessibility issue. They are indeed, and this is a huge issue moving forward for a variety of ways. We are also getting older in the European Union, so these are definitely not only important from a social perspective, but it's also important, I would say, from a business development perspective across the board for SMEs and larger companies alike. So I would definitely encourage SMEs, if they are listening in today, to get on board on this accessibility train, as it were. And again, the directive also applies to them when it comes to services, with a certain number of caveats, as I just mentioned.
Do you somehow follow up on the effects of added accessibility? Do you somehow observe if that affects the lives of the people whose lives it should affect, or whose lives it's intended to affect?
We do, of course. I mean, we are working, as I mentioned in my presentation, the new strategy 21-2030. If you go through it, it's quite a comprehensive strategy. It's a very comprehensive strategy even. And if you look through it, you will see that many of the different actions which are listed there are in fact these kind of actions that you just mentioned. So there are actions to follow up, there are actions to measure, and there are actions to evaluate. So actions to evaluate, I think I mentioned the Employment Equality Directive. There's a digital governance strategy which take up these different things. There's the evaluation of the Web Accessibility Directive in itself. So definitely, yes, all of this is being measured. One thing perhaps that we are not measuring, or we haven't measured yet, but which I would say is not a bad idea. On the contrary, it is to see how e-translation and accessibility, if there is, so we haven't measured the use of e-translation with people with disabilities. But this is something that perhaps we can try to do in the future to see if it does have an impact, and what kind of impact in that sense it actually has on the ground.
Yeah. How far do you see that the European Union as an organization, you already mentioned it on a few occasions there, how far has the EU come as an organization with regards to accessibility and being on the forefront and kind of getting all materials accessible? How far are you there? Maybe not a simple question, but
this is a little bit of a trick question, Johan. But because why? Because I'm director of resources, and because I work in the institution. So my answer will not necessarily be neutral and objective, but I will try to be as neutral and objective as I possibly can. And I would say that we are quite far in combating the different issues that are related to accessibility. We are I would say, even very far. I mean, we have a lot of colleagues with accessibility, with a certain number of disabilities, who are working for us in the European Commission, and we have actions, just for the buildings, for instance, that we have accessibility possibilities for people with disabilities in all our buildings, obviously. We have also in DDT a certain number of colleagues who have disabilities, and we are helping them with specific tools. So the Dragon speech, for instance, is something that we are using. So and we are making sure that people with disabilities do have the possibility to work as anyone else, have complete access to the different tools that we have, and then we provide on demand any kind of tools that they may need, being from keyboards, from mice, from whatever I would say the different hardware tools that we can provide, we will do so. So I think we are an employer that is quite far ahead. I wouldn't say ahead, but at least is quite far on the way towards helping people with disabilities, ensuring that we have a very good accessibility to all of the different tools and buildings that we employ in the European Commission. But as I said again, this is of course from my perspective. There may be other perspectives. Is everything perfect? This I wouldn't say. No, I think we can improve, but I think we're also improving as we move along, and we have it a little bit more, shall we say, easy to improve right now, as the different tools, as I mentioned in the beginning, or towards the end rather of my presentation, the different tools based on new technology are there, and we are using them already today. So I would say yes, it works reasonably well. Can of course be improved.
Yeah, and actually we have a mention here in the chat that it's a pity that we are not translating text. Translating in text from the beginning today, and then maybe that's an example of how it's not 100% solved everything. We are offering text translation today from 11 a.m., but not yet. We are sorry about that, and then maybe next time it will be 100%. That's I think, Ulla, you're perfectly right. That would be the ideal case. Do you see, Jörgen, this accessibility directive being picked up equally everywhere in the EU and with the member states? Are they picking up on it in everywhere?
That's the idea of any directive or act, obviously.
Yeah.
If they do not, I mean, again, now the implementation of all EU legislation is unfortunately imperfect. We have a certain number of letters going out to member states for non-implementation, non-transposition, etc. When it comes to all of our different legislation, and this is not something which is reserved for certain parts of the European Union, certain member states, which are always the bad guys within brackets. This is not at all the case. This is very equally shared, I would say, across the European Union. Now, as I mentioned in my presentation, in the new strategy that we have, the 2021-2030 strategy, the evaluation of the directive and the act is a part of the key, even flagship measures here. And as we do this, and this will be done next year rather than this year. So I am not in a position today to give you the exact level of implementation or transposition, etc. It's possible that we can go back to this issue next year, and I can give you the full evaluation. But this will be shown in the evaluation, because the evaluation is about just this, how it is implemented in the different member states. But again, implementation is usually imperfect, and it depends a little bit on the member states. But I do see that accessibility is a part of the thinking when it comes to websites. This I do see. And this is also pushed not just by the different member states, but it's also pushed by the consortium that I just mentioned, the World Wide Web Consortium. They have understood, I think, the importance of this. And I think that also most member states do understand, if not all, do understand the importance of accessibility also when it comes to digital services. Again, there will be a digital government, digital service strategy coming out, potentially this year, beginning of next, which will take this up. So we understand, I would say, the issue, and we are acting on it. Again, I can really encourage you to go and have a look at the 2021-2030 strategy, because in there you will see the activity, if you will, of the European Commission and the identification of the different needs and the different actions which come with this identification on the different needs. And it is extremely comprehensive. It's a very, I know that we don't want necessarily to have very long documents, but in this case, perhaps it is reasonable to have a comprehensive document, very comprehensive document. And in this case, we do have a very comprehensive document, which is now have at least around 20-25 pages of identification of the different needs and identification of the different follow-up actions in each and every one of these different objectives that I just mentioned to you.
And the following question, maybe to you as a manager or leader of an organization, maybe from a HR perspective too, do you have some good tips maybe, or if for a person leading an organization in a member state who would like their organization to be more inclusive or accessible, producing, for example, accessible content, where do you have some tips how to make the organization think more about these issues and realize why they are important?
But first of all, I think you need to have an inclusiveness type of strategy. This is the first thing. This is something that we are working on in the European Union now. It's a very high on the priority of Mrs. von der Leyen for us to be inclusive, all types of inclusiveness, including disabilities. I think that is the first starting point, I would say. The next starting point is to ensure that you think about accessibility as per design. So from the very beginning. And this is also something that we are trying to do. So right now, for instance, we are changing the different building, the building policy of the European Union, of the European Commission has changed. We are trying to reduce the number of square meters across the board in Brussels in particular, but also in Luxembourg. So from the very beginning, accessibility is a part of the thinking in these new buildings. Again, this is a recommendation. There is also very small things that you can do for us. What is important as trying to take the leadership in this is to ensure that you have all the different technical tools and that you have the budget, as it were, is very small detailed things, and that you actually foresee a budget for tools which will help with accessibility or which will help colleagues with disabilities. This can be for very small things like licenses for speech to text, licensing for Dragon text, for instance, or any other. I'm not here saying that this is the only product in the market, but these kind of licenses that you have actually a budget for this, and we do have a budget for this, and then that you also have, if you are a larger organization, I would say one good thing to do is to have a small task force for this organization to help with accessibility, which is what we have in the European Commission as well. So I would say that it's you have to look at it across the board, and you would try to mainstream the accessibility issues across the board in your organization. But again, the starting point here is to think about it in terms of the strategy, so that you know what you're doing, and B, think about it as part of the design. So from the very beginning, if possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. Obviously, to design things from the beginning into the process, so that accessibility becomes more a natural part, not something you add on top after you've done everything else.
Exactly, because then it becomes more difficult, obviously.
Yeah. Do you see some area of accessibility that isn't yet covered there, or that isn't sufficiently covered in the Act or in the recommendations yet, that should be coming or is coming?
That's of course a little bit difficult for me to say. I mean, many of the issues. Sorry, many of the issues are under exclusive competence of the member states or share competence. So it's not under the exclusive accessibility as a general rule is not under the exclusive competence of the European Union. So we are directing a certain number of more softer measures toward the different member states, and here I think. I mean, newer things which are coming on board now, I would say, is how do we render e-voting accessible? Just as an example, or how do we have inclusion at the early childhood, which is an educational issue, which is not an EU competence at all. So I think we are working on these different recommendations. They are not necessarily a part of the Act. The Web Accessibility Act, of course, because we don't have any capacity to propose this. But when we did propose the Web Accessibility Act, I think we were also a little bit of a forerunner in this, not only in Europe, but also across the world. So I think that, again, we are step by step moving forward. Everything can, of course, be very much improved obviously. I mean, we also, just to give another example, when we will have a guidance on independent living, which is again something which is not a European competence. This is very much a capacity and competence of the different EU member states. So little by little, we have to push the different member states towards having a better level of accessibility and a better handling of the issues surrounding people with disabilities. Only a thing like internet connections, where you can have specific program for people with disabilities. Again, going back to the figures, 64% towards over 90%. I mean, there is a huge difference here, and again, if we go forward, and this is also why we are focusing so much on digital services, digital services is key when it comes to dealing with accessibility issues, when it comes to helping people with disabilities. This is absolutely key. But if you don't have internet access, then how does it work? So there are a certain number of foundational issues, basic stepping stones that need to be there. And I think that we are trying, at least doing our best here at the level of European Union in the areas where we do not have competence, to push member states towards improving the situation, improving the accessibility situation. Again, I can only encourage you to look at the strategy of 2021-2030, which is I would say truly a milestone in the issue of dealing with accessibility and dealing with issues around disabilities. And this was a strong wish from Mrs. von der Leyen, and we are putting it into practice.
Yeah, and as a personal note, I'd say that the accessibility. I have worked on projects that have derived from accessibility from the public sector needing to, for example, do subtitling, and they have woken up to it that okay, now we need it, and now we'll order it from the language service industry. So. That and the web pages guidelines, they have been an eye opener for me personally. I'm ashamed to say that I have never thought about it, how difficult pages can be for people who don't see something or hear something in the same way as, for example, I do. So I think that the directive and everything tied to it is also important, not just as a technical thing, but as an eye opener and for the way we think and how web designers and service designers think and what they how they think about the basics of their services. So that's very important.
A lot of political issues, of course, starts with awareness raising, and I think that this act and the directive have helped to raise the awareness of these issues, and we will continue, of course, with this strategy and all the different actions in this strategy.
Mr. Gren, thank you for a very interesting presentation.